Hello, and welcome to the first podcast for Farotech. We have a new initiative here where we are going to try to communicate to our clients and prospective clients and kind of using these opportunities through podcasts to teach new and effective ways to reach your audiences. Our goal is to be able to coach anyone who works with us or anyone that could be working with us on how to effectively generate leads, nurture leads into clients, and then ideally convert those clients into brand ambassadors or raving fans or whatever marketingese word, we sort of want to use. Today's podcast is going to be talking about how to market telemedicine services to your potential patients. Farotech works with a large majority of our client base is in the healthcare space. And while a lot of these approaches are going to be effective for healthcare, they're also going to be effective for other forms of marketing that you're going to be doing. So if you're watching this podcast and you think, it's not for me, you should know that, a lot of these tactics are going to be true whether you're in medicine or not. So today on the show, we also have Todd Smith. Todd is the VP of Partner Growth, and him and I are going to be going back and forth on this topic. What you should know is that I created a blog about this exact topic about a month ago. Todd, can you see this on my screen?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. And so what I did here is when I created the blog, I talked about a two-part system, and we're going to walk through parts of that today. What I'm trying to do is anytime I write a blog is to write some step-by-step methodologies or tactics that you can use so that we're not just talking about theory, but also how to execute as well. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of pass the ball back to Todd, and we're going to kind of kick this thing off.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. And I'm really excited about this podcast series.
Yeah, me too.
To your point, I think it's exciting just to take some of the information that we've learned throughout the years. I know you've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and it's amazing from a technology perspective how much things have changed. And especially as you look at telemedicine, a couple of years ago, telemedicine was kind of a nice thing to have for a company, a nice alternative. And then in the last couple of months, obviously with the manifestation of Zoom and just the increase of everybody working from home and Zoom calls, it's almost become urgent. So there's this sense of urgency now for companies in the telehealth, telemedicine facets that they need to get their stuff together and really work out a plan. One of the things that you mentioned in your blog is that the American Journal for Managed Care states that telemedicine has become more sophisticated with each advance in technology, and that's ever more important right now. So one of the things that you mentioned in your blog is that, this impact of telemedicine on, COVID-19. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Sure. Well, one of the things that was pretty funny is I was thinking about this podcast over the weekend, and I was watching something, and it was a Microsoft commercial. And Microsoft has something called Microsoft Teams, and they were interviewing doctors, and the doctors were saying they were getting like 500 patients a month that were doing telemedicine. Now they're up to about 5,000 a day.
Wow.
And so what happens here is that a pandemic happens. Nobody could see it happening. And, healthcare providers had to either respond or die. And a lot of them, I will compliment them. A lot of them were up within 48 to 72 hours. I mean, I'm sure there was bumps in the road, but the adoption rate of medical in the medical community was insane. And what I also think sort of happened is that Zoom and other platforms where we did teleconferencing just as casual people, like the technology and the crisis sort of landed at the same time. And it wasn't this huge leap. You know what I mean? It wasn't like this thing where people were like, well, how's this going to work? It's like, all right, well, if I can figure out how to log in and I can figure out how to do that, that would be great. But
so some of the framework was already built, so it wasn't that big of a jump to get there.
Yep.
So how about from a marketing perspective? I know you mentioned in your blog that it's a two-step approach. So you kind of have first step is short-term and second step is long-term. So can you speak to the short-term? What are things that people in the telemarketing or telehealth industry, what can they do short-term to really help get themselves placed properly in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a great question. So what was happening here is that we were reaching out to our clients, and they're saying, We want to communicate effectively to our clients. And so they did a lot of the base level stuff on their homepage of their website and stuff that was saying like, you know what, I'm going to need to explain our COVID procedures, explain emergency stuff. We're going to talk about our commitment to cleanliness and making sure that we're locking this thing down. But then what it also tried to do is it tried to communicate, you know, we're still here for you, even though we might not be able to treat all patients. And so what happened was in the short term, they basically did the most basic things. But at the same exact time, because they didn't know what was going to happen, almost every medical community that, or basically client that we had, immediately went into a spending freeze as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they went into a spending freeze, they had to get really creative on how they were going to market to their clients. And so one of the things that we recommended that they do is be in a scenario where if they have certain doctors are on furlough or not working as much, what we were trying to say is make the most of that time or that opportunity, because you might not ever get this again. And so we were talking about tactics in the blog as far as trying to say, hey, you know what? If I have a subject matter expert, that's usually the number one person that I can't get their time in the normal world. But because of this crisis, because their time management might be a little bit different, you might be able to get them to communicate about their services and their commitments and the things that they do simply because they have the time. And so to do that, you don't need that expensive of technology. You know, we said, you know what, you really want to get video. We want to get involved in video. And I even recommended the same program we're on right now. It's a program called StreamYard. I think it costs around $20 a month. And with that program, you know, subject matter experts from certain hospitals and stuff like that would be able to jump on and they'd say, hey, you know what? If you've got foot pain, this is what an Achilles tear is, or this is what plantar fasciitis is. And what happens here is that they're going to be able to develop this library of content that when the crisis is over, they're going to have a library of content that they never would have had time for.
Right.
You know,
now that's really interesting, because that seems to be, you know, that opportunity to create this content while you have the time. Now, what about paid ads and social media ads? What's your recommendation there?
Well, I mean, that part gets a little bit tricky from the aspect of if you're in a spending freeze, you know, you might be able to get paid ads, but you got to have a little bit of a budget to keep that operating.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I would have recommended, you know, that I would have recommended if you have a budget or you don't have a budget, if you can even just get a little bit of a budget, you want to cash in on something that we call retargeting. So a lot of people that, even if they're not going to be able to get services from that particular healthcare partner, when they go to the website, they don't even know it, but they're getting a tracking code or a piece, we call it a cookie. And the cookie basically goes onto their computer or goes onto their phone. So when they leave the website, you know, your ads get to basically follow them around for 30, 60 or 40 days. You know, it's kind of like that pair of shoes on Amazon where, you know, you looked at them once and now they follow you wherever you go. So that's going to be an important thing to do. Other things that, you know, you want to be able to do in that process is as they come to the website and as they engage, when that cookie is on their computer, you can also go back to organizations. Let's say hypothetically you're doing with Facebook, you can develop what's called lookalike audiences. And the lookalike audiences will basically say, hey, if patient number one came to my practice and that patient was an ideal patient, when they leave, I can go to something like Facebook and it says, say her name was Jane Smith, even though it's probably not a HIPAA thing to do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Facebook will say, you know what, these are 30 other people that have the exact same
fit the profile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And how about messaging? Like, how important is messaging, you know, to this sector?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be really important from an aspect of, we talk about something called the buyer's journey. And what's going to happen when the buyer's journey is that there's going to be early adopters of technology that are going to buy in and they're just going to get it. And I think that the technology is so intuitive that when assuming that they're logged on and they're HIPAA, you know, the program is HIPAA compliant, they're gonna be able to see things like their x-rays or their charts and things like that. And I think they're going to be like, wow, you know what? I actually feels better than being in the doctor's office myself. There's also going to be pieces of technology that they're going to be able to do to get their own blood pressure checked and stuff like that. I think it's going to be different, but it doesn't exactly have to be worse. Gotcha. So when I talk about messaging, there's going to be people that are early adopters and they're going to just get it. And then there's going to be other people of other demographics that are going to be in a scenario where they're just scared of the technology.
Wait and see.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if you can't create a one size fits all message, you know what I mean? You have to know where they're at in the ideal perspective. And then you want to be able to create content, you know, based upon the trends and the things that you see, because.
Gotcha. So you're recommending that companies spend time developing buyer personas, developing that buyer's journey, and then developing the messaging that's associated to each of those niches within their target markets. Okay. Yep. So,
and I want to comment on that is that a lot of times what happens is that a lot of healthcare centers don't know their own list. And what they do is they just blast their whole list with one message.
Right.
So even if you did broad strokes and said, hey, you know what, if I took my list and I segmented by specialty and then also segmented it by age groups, and just maybe on the hunch that younger people are going to be able to adopt technology faster, I might do messaging for that buyer persona that's a little bit further down the line, where maybe an older demographic are going to say, this is what telemedicine is. You shouldn't be afraid of it. Here's how you log in. You're safe, all that stuff like that.
Gotcha. So in a sense, especially as it relates to, you know, paid and social ads, if you can do some of the upfront work, you know, in the short term, developing buyer personas, working on the buyer's journey, you can actually take those bigger lists and reduce them into more segmented lists. And then that will actually save you money on your paid advertising.
Correct. And the reason why we're saying paid in the short term, when we talked about a two-prong approach here, is that that's about speed, and you can get there a little bit faster. Now,
quicker.
What I don't want to do is say you can snap your fingers and you have a paid campaign. It's up in 48 hours and it's effective. That's just not true, and it's a misconception about paid for sure.
All right, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
But so the challenge that you can't. Okay, so from a long-term perspective, if you're getting,
well, that's where I was going there, real quick.
Okay,
so just define short-term, real quick. So when you say short-term, like what's a
30,
telehealth company thinking?
30, 60, 90 days.
30, 60, 90. Okay, so basically 1 to 3 months. Okay, so now let's transfer to long-term strategy. What's that term look like in your eyes?
Well, based upon the competitiveness of the keyword, and there's some really cool studies on how long it takes more competitive keywords to rank. The short answer is bigger, more competitive keywords don't rank overnight.
Right.
If you try to SEO your way into marketing your telemedicine, you better have hit a home run on your first pitch, because it takes maybe 60 to 90 days to really get in a prime position. You know what I mean? Where people can see and find out information. And there's a lot of people also, there's a lot of practices marketing their telemedicine. So I probably wouldn't rest my hopes in the short term on SEO, but that does not mean that the things you're developing in the short term don't turn into long-term initiatives. So let's pretend like I have a doctor and he's a knee specialist, and for some reason he's got more time now. So the marketing coordinator at this hospital says, hey, you know what, Dr. Smith, we'll never be able to get your time like this. I'm wondering if you can start to go over certain procedures or treatment areas that deal with knee pain. So Dr. Smith goes on and he gets on a video just like this, and he talks about knee treatment and ACL tears and MCL tears and things like that. And we just have videos. What you're able to do in the phase 2 is that this quarantine is not going to be here forever. So I'm going to take those videos, I'm going to transcribe them, I'm going to get them in front of an SEO writer. And then a couple months down the line, I'm going to be in a scenario here where my video content turns into written content, and written content turns into SEO optimized content.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. Now, the only thing that we really have to understand for our audience right now is that, you know, obviously like a doctor's time is extremely valuable. So, you know, what's the value of that content long-term?
Sure. And you know what, like you can't get that doctor's time in normal days. And so with doctors who are on furlough or doctors who are going to be on a reduced schedule, you might be able to say, hey, you know what, Dr. Smith, you know, this pandemic stinks. I know your time isn't going to feel like you have tons of time, but what I can say is that let's make the most of it. Let's get you in front of a camera, because I'll never be able to get this much of your time in the future.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Now, how about, where do you see lead nurturing fitting into a long-term strategy?
Yep. Well, I mean, I think one of the things that you want to be able to do is that if you're using any form of automation, if you've connected your telemedicine software with a form that you do on your website, as they log into the software, they're also getting a cookie on their computer for maybe, let's say, the automation program you're using is HubSpot. What I'm going to be able to do with HubSpot is I'm going to be able to find out when they log in, I'm going to be able to find out more information about them. It's going to be if you're doing it right, into a HIPAA compliant database. And then from that point on, you're going to be able to drip to them based upon, their pain and things like that. And so I think that that's going to be really important to do.
All right, so from a long-term strategy, that customer information that you can gain in the background is really going to help. And the final part on long-term strategy that we want to finish with is analytics and measuring.
Sure.
Because that's really where we need to A, justify ROI, and then B, create those conversions, and then modify our marketing, to either, duplicate this or replicate this for other buyer personas.
Yeah. Because this pandemic's not going to be here forever. It might feel like it sure feels like
it feels like it is actually. Yeah.
Yeah. But that this information of knowing who these potential patients are, even if, I'm assuming when you do have the patients in your database, you're de-identifying them, and you're finding out trends of demographics and things like that. You're trying to get more and more information over time. But in the future, as social media, as Google, and all of these other tracking pixels, as they grow in technology and they stay on your website, they're learning more and more about your target audience. And so everybody who engages, everybody who, works, who's on your website is making your system smarter and smarter.
Sure. So
later on, your database gets bigger. You can segment better. You can get the right message to the right people at the right time. Okay. And in the long run, you're going to have really great success.
All right. That sounds good. And then let's just close out, Chris, just with, a final tip for people that are marketing to the telehealth industry. Like what's a good final tip that they really need to know?
Don't wait.
Don't wait. Okay.
I think
not too soon to start.
It's not too soon to start. I think good enough today is better than a masterpiece, tomorrow, because we're 90 days into this process, this pandemic.
Almost 4 months.
And almost going on 4 months. People have already started to just kind of say, you know what, this is a new normal. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to find, I went to the doctor for the first time. We're considered phase green in Philadelphia. And, they were saying, hey, we've actually been open this whole time. I was like, well, you know what? I had no way of knowing, because your website doesn't indicate that in any way, shape, or form.
Definitely.
And I think if they had marketed more effectively, I would have gotten my foot treated 3 months ago.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, cool. Well, Chris, thank you for your time. This has been a pleasure and really insightful. If somebody wants to learn more about Farotech, how do they do that?
Obviously, you can go to farotech.com. You can email us at info@farotech.com. We're going to try to put out these podcasts as frequently as we can. We're not committed to a regular schedule as of yet, but please subscribe. Be in a scenario here where you just keep in touch. And it's our goal to get you the most up-to-date information on how to effectively market to your potential clients.
Great. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.